What are the components, what is it that makes nations count as great powers? How do they become great powers? What is exactly needed? Do you need to be an economic giant? Do you need to have a very superior military where you can have influence directly or indirectly through allies across the world? Important is, for example, the knowledge sector of great powers. Ultimately, and one of the things we casually talked about the last couple of days is that the greatest powers are those which are also the centers of knowledge. So when you look at India today, it's not just sufficient to say we have X% economic growth, or these are the numbers of planes or tanks that we have, or we have the largest army in the world, or so on. It is also about the knowledge sector and how that can be projected onto the world stage. But other than hard power, things that you can really measure, what also makes for great powers is soft power, where you are widely respected around the world for your economic power and other things. And now, what are those other things? Cinema could be one, music could be another, but your universities, when you think of where your kids should study, where our kids should go to college, they typically think of IITs or IIMs in India. But these are the greatest institutions in our country. But how do they measure up among the world's best? So if you have hundreds of thousands of Indians who are going abroad, that reflects badly on our soft power. You need hard power to actually manufacture soft power. China is doing exactly that. Within the larger framework, Professor Paul's presentation is going to be of more academic nature. But what we are hoping for is a more general kind of a discussion around the themes that he'll be highlighting. Professor Paul is the James McGill Professor of International Relations at the Department of Political Science, McGill University. And he was last in Goa, at the International Center Goa in 2014. That was the time when the Pakistan book was released. He's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. He served as the president of the International Studies Association, ISA, for 2016-17. So he's one of the two people of Indian origin to have headed the International Studies Association, and that's a big deal, really. It's pretty much an organization which has been dominated by, American, European scholars. Professor Paul is the author or editor of 20 books and about 75 plus scholarly journal articles. But most recently, Restraining Great Powers, Soft Balancing from Empires to the Global Era, Yale University Press. All his books are published by the most prestigious academic publishers. One is with Yale University Press, the other with Cambridge University Press, and Oxford University Press, and Princeton University Press, so you name it. So it's a big deal in academic circles, not so much in India, where we think of HarperCollins or Penguin and so on. The Warrior State, Pakistan in the Contemporary World, published by Oxford University Press in 2013. Professor Paul currently serves as editor of the Georgetown University book series, South Asia and World Affairs. Admiral Arun Prakash often comes to the International Center Goa. He's not a stranger to us either. And he writes prolifically. Admiral Prakash was India's 20th Naval Chief and served concurrently as Chairman Chiefs of Staff 2004 to 6. He is a naval aviator by specialization and commanded a fighter squadron as well as a number of warships, including the aircraft carrier Virat. In flag rank, he commanded the Eastern Fleet, the Andaman and Nicobar Joint Command, and the Western Naval Command. He served on staff as head of the Navy's aviation and personnel branches and as the vice chief. Since his retirement, he has served 2 terms in the National Security Advisory Board. Admiral Prakash writes and speaks on maritime and strategic issues and currently holds a distinguished chair in India's Naval War College. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us here at the International Center Goa. Professor Paul, the way we'll begin, the way we'll conduct today's session is there'll be a short presentation by Professor Paul, about 15-20 minutes, where he'll introduce the outline of his forthcoming project. And then we'll take up some of the issues that are brought up in the presentation for further discussion. Professor Paul.
As Pushkar said, I was here in 2014 and I had a great launch here, and all the Goa papers had nice reviews of my book at the time. So my memory of this place. And then I have been visiting the Naval War College for at least 3 times, given lectures there. But let me thank Pushkar Dr. Pushkar is uh, perhaps one of the most leading scholars, writer on Indian educational sector. And this is something that I have been telling him, that this sector needs your attention more than anything else, because of the need for understanding higher education sector, why it's the way it is. And his beloved wife, Madhvi Gupta, is sitting there, and lovely daughter who we spent some time yesterday. And it is always a pleasure to have your friends and colleagues to be back with. And Admiral Prakash, Arun Prakash, I've known him through Track 2 meetings organized by University of Ottawa. But more than that, I've been also an admirer of his writings, very punchy, short, but extremely useful, and courageous in many ways for an ex-Indian officer, given the way sometimes retired people don't feel like writing critical things, but I think I admire that courage. Keep it up. All right, so this is actually a book, as Pushkar said, 2013 was the time, actually quite a bit back. Baldev Nayar, who is one of India's political economy scholar, and a very interesting life story. Baldev was a child of partition, and he was only 13 or something back in Rawalpindi. He had to migrate to India with his pregnant mother, and the father had to stay as a railway office clerk, stay back, and the mother gave birth to his brother in a railway station in Patiala or one of those places. And this 13-year-old was responsible for taking care of that. So his life story is very moving. He just wrote a little book about it. And then he had to struggle through what Delhi was at that time with some extended family, ended up studying himself, becoming the secretary to Chester Bowles, ambassador United States to India during Nehru's time, who recommends him to University of Chicago, goes there and studies, ends up at McGill as a professor, writes so many books and everything. And I arrived there quite a bit thanks to his efforts too, and we co-authored this book. And he has very strong opinions on various things, so it was a challenge. But now that I go back and try to look at the book, and we were not sure where India will reach the level it reached within the next 2 decades. What is impressive is it did achieve quite a bit, not necessarily because of efforts alone, but by default. The international system changed, or the great power system adopted, accommodated India, United States in particular, which was not something we could foresee in 2003, or because the United States at that time was very hostile to India's aspirations, especially the nuclear test was a big challenge. But that test changed India's position to some extent. It pushed us out of the, what you call the fence-sitter mode. I know most of you are not into the theories of things, but there is a lot of interesting insights. New literature is coming out on status in world politics. I did an edited book on it. So the central claim that I'm hoping to make is that countries like India have 2 or 3 major national goals: security, prosperity, of course, the fundamental one. But there is an additional one called aspiration to become a nation that is to be counted, has influence, has power. So this is what you call status. And what is noticeable is from Nehru's period onwards, this has been an aspiration of almost every Indian leader or leadership. Of course, there are ups and downs. And the mechanisms they used obviously is questionable sometimes. But the point is, India has been aspiring a role that sometimes has been elusive, as Pushkar rightly mentioned. And so there's 2 pivotal points that India missed the boat. The first was in 1945 in San Francisco, the post-war settlement. That's the United Nations Security Council creation. Unfortunately, India was a colony. It was not included as a P5 member, despite efforts by the British vetoed it basically. The end of the Cold War, the other time was 1968 when the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty came into being, accepting the 5 permanent members as legitimate nuclear weapon states, everybody else non-legitimate. So India was the number one challenger to it, and that was driven by status consideration, that it didn't want to be permanently treated as an underclass power, that it has to be a great power or a major power. So this is a subject that requires a lot of interest, gaining a lot of interest because of China's efforts to gain additional status, and of course Brazil and a few other countries that are making some efforts. And the literature goes back actually to Thucydides, to Gilpin in modern times, Machiavelli. Many political philosophers talk about Thomas Hobbes, American constitution makers. They all talk about the subject of the urge for humans to achieve status, and sometimes used as prestige, sometimes used as honor, etc. So it is a puzzle. Why would a country that had so little material power aspired for status? And that's a puzzle has not been properly explained in the Indian case. So Nehru definitely justifies it, saying that it was a great civilization and it did provide a lot of material, other role in the world. It had to become when it became a colony, it lost many of that, and that it is only in due course it will return to its glory. And the current government, I'm sure, is saying the same thing in a different manner, but that's also very clear that somehow India is bound to get there, for the very markers, very parameters that are relevant to a great power is there. That's the argument. So let me define what is a great power, what is status. Status, at least we define, is collective beliefs about a given state, ranking on valued attributes such as wealth, coercive capabilities, demographic position, socio-political organization, and diplomatic clout. So imagine the first word is collective beliefs. It is not what you believe about yourself, it is what others believe of you. So it's almost like beauty. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Although Christina Aguilera has this famous song, "I Am Beautiful," which is good for your own satisfaction, but other persons have to accept it, that you are beautiful or you have a higher status, because it's a socio-psychological concept. It is not just out of some markers. And it is a very difficult thing to achieve. Why? People who have status, already got status, won't let you in. It's a very difficult thing to achieve for a newcomer. Newcomers sometimes had to fight wars. So Graham Allison has a new book called Thucydides' Trap. The argument is that out of 14 great power transformations, only 4 happened without war. And some people say basically the US-Britain transformation at the end of the 19th century and the partial accommodation of China by Nixon, Kissinger were perhaps the few cases. Almost all big power transitions in this area happened through war and post-war settlement. So winners decide who has status by placing them in institutions such as United Nations, before the League of Nations, before that Concert of Europe. Even if they are weak institutions, they are this institutional recognition of a great power. Now, what is a great power? A great power is defined in many ways. Great power is often, in the past, the capacity to wage war and defeat another great power. So great power is one who won war against another great power. But that has changed the 21st century, 20th century onwards quite a bit. Today we are talking about what you call comprehensive national power. A country that at least has a majority of some 10 elements of comprehensive national power. And out of that material power of 4 elements, you have what I call hard power: economic, technology, demographic, and military, of course, number 1, changing in some situations. Then you have soft power, which is the power based on your attractiveness. Normative position, what kind of norms you project to the world. Leadership role in international institutions, your culture. State capacity, the capacity of the state to deliver public goods, also receive legitimacy and acceptance. strategy and diplomacy of the leadership, and of course the national leadership, the leader who can project power and influence. So you have 10 elements, and it is important to realize that not everybody has all these elements at the same time. But take Russia, for instance. May not have much economic power, but it has pretty strong military power. And once you reach a stage, it's very hard to lose that. And Russia's problem is actually a status depreciation by the West after it lost the Cold War. West thought Russia lost the war. The Russians thought, no, we made some concessions, we haven't. So what Putin is doing is actually a status challenge. His behavior is very much akin to what you call a country that believes it has a status, when the rest of the world, that's the Western world, doesn't give it what it requires. Let me briefly identify the mechanisms of status push. How do you get there? There are a couple of theories that identify, social identity theory, that's so-called social mobility, one way to get there, emulating the values and behaviors of members of an elite group to be admitted to the club. So you have to be able to get admitted through mobility that the system should provide. Social competition, existing status hierarchies as illegitimate and unchangeable, mobility is lacking, so competition and sometimes war is necessary. Social creativity, evaluating a negative as positive or identifying a new criterion for evaluation on which the group ranks highly developed. So high developmental model, culture, diplomatic initiative. So the last one is what Nehru tried. Non-alignment, global positioning, a kind of normative position. It didn't succeed partly because without hard power, soft power cannot sustain power. So when you lose a war with China, that really hurt India's soft power too. It's not just really hard power it lost, and it took a lot of efforts to then return to modicum. Actually, the end of the Cold War was needed for that transformation. So then the question is, why do countries seek status? Why is that people are so after this crazy thing? There are different theories. There's something called people have intrinsic psychological need to be recognized, especially social groups, social craving. Countries are made up of individuals, obviously. Then there are material benefits. It increases your capacity to attract trade, economic capacity, security power, etc. And then there is this notion coming out of India, which is the Indian elite that came out of independence thought we have a moral right to fight for leadership role in the world, to change the colonial world that was still going on. And so that is not included in many Western theories, this kind of a desire to be not purely out of self-interest alone, but to help others, because we had to struggle and the others have to go that role. So that is part of the reason Nehru and all thought, even though it doesn't have the material power, it can still wage a certain amount of moral crusade against the other thing. Then there is last one is civilizational basis. Nehru also thought India left indelible mark on a quarter of humanity, and it needs to reclaim that history. And I don't want to go too much into the current leadership that also believes that civilization is very important for India to project its power as a great power, etc. So, then we have to start looking at why is it so slow for India to get there? Or is it slow, actually? Without winning a war. Look, the Chinese almost won a war in Korea, 1953. The Americans had to take note of China because this very poor country with rifles and leftover stuff by the Japanese retreating army could stop this great power, superpower. And then they were very important in many conflicts, Vietnam included. And then, of course, the transformation after the 1973 period. See, the problem with India, we haven't defeated any great powers yet. The closest great power defeated us, which creating that status change hasn't happened. So the conflict has been with Pakistan, a status inferior, but that believes equal to India, by the way, for reasons I have actually quite a bit in my other book on warrior state, why the Pakistanis think they are co-equals, despite the material weakness. So there has been status denial, And countries are assessed on the basis of their near peer competitors. So after the end of the Cold War, until then India was bracketed with Pakistan, unfortunately. End of the Cold War, this changed. We started, especially after the liberalization, China, India, Chin India, all these terms, rising powers, all that became very important. And that's where for 10 years, about 15 years, India has been riding quite well. Manmohan Singh's period, then the current period, this current government, the first period at least, Vajpayee's period. There's a lot of appreciation happened for India's transformation. And the post 9/11 world, it was looked upon as a country, that was reasonably able to accommodate internal, especially the Muslim population. So then China under Xi Jinping, for a period of time, treated India as a co-equal, with the BRICS and all that, and the BRICS banks. Suddenly, Xi Jinping's aspirations increased because of the material change, and now the BRI, it is trying to break out of this BRICS, although it will use the BRICS, but it's not clear BRICS is what its main interest is. China, under Xi Jinping, wants to replace the United States peacefully, if possible, without a war. So where is in India all that? And that is the project I'm trying to address here. Oh, I didn't do much there. So this is what I've been talking about it. So already said all this. What are the reasons why countries go for status? What are India's weaknesses, problems? I will come to that in a minute. These elements that we can talk about in relative terms, where are we in all those issue areas? What are the constraints? Okay, let me come to that. So, a number of markers, India has made this progress, and it is very clear that the testing of nuclear weapons and the way it was conducted, late acquisition problem, space technology, quite a bit based on status aspiration. Now that is also not really analyzed in the Indian context. We have this focus on high tech, some of these parameters of status, but totally neglect of low tech or applied technology. And that is why India has problem getting the status recognition it deserves on the basis of that alone. So the problem with a poor country or a poor individual buying a BMW when it cannot feed has a problem. Okay, that's called conspicuous consumption, and that is where Indian elites sometimes ignore that fact. I mean, it's a good domestic vote catcher. So, but the scientists also seem to ignore that you need to have all elements of scientific advancement, technology, including your road construction, your garbage collection. There are things, applied things that are needed. So anyway, let me try to conclude by saying that the constraints and opportunities, mostly with great powers, have been changing with the United States, changing India seriously up to a point. And of course, other great powers too, European states. So balance of power considerations have become very important after China's push, and where India is considered as a pivotal state or a bridge state or a state that could play a swing state, some call it, important role. But India is reluctant to form military coalitions, so it's playing what you call soft balancing to some extent. And emerging Asia Pacific has a lot of opportunities for India. Other constraints are obviously the regional constraints. That is suddenly changing, unfortunately, with the Pakistan equation, Kashmir. Then your weaker neighbors, smaller states, have a lot more agency today because of China's arrival. So there was a time when India had probably more status, because although it was never recognized as a hegemonic power, but that is changing dramatically because of China's intrusion after a long period of absence. Then there is perceptual issues, how India is viewed, world image, sometimes difficult to change, governance challenges, etc. So to conclude, why this transmission belt problem, why is status not coming easily, although as I said, quite a bit has happened. And I think the problem, I mean, this is where a comparison with China would help. Chinese Communist Party tells its people at village level to state level, municipality level, all, you have to perform. Why do you have to perform? For China's great power status, to become this great global power. So it's not just purely for material reasons your performance matters. And I don't know whether that has happened in India. The elite at the top level, the prime minister level and all are very much, even military and all, are very much into this subject up to a point. But the lower bureaucratic political class across national, state, municipal, panchayat, are they driven by this great hope for making this country a great power, a great, or they have a vision which may be not consistent with what we can call a great power. And this is what is need education and training to the lower rank official. So if he or she is sitting on a file, doesn't move it, it is slowing down India's great power positioning. And this is something that we need to address. So that's where the weak state syndrome, a state that can provide collective goods, whether it is able to offer that collective goods with a legitimate mission is. And the absence of a developmental state approach, human development in particular, or slowly coming there. And so finally to argue that we need a number of changes in our attitude because status is not linear. We need to look at inclusive growth, education sector, which was mentioned, infrastructure, health, hygiene, supply water, women and children, civil society, and even hard power, make India. Great idea. But buying weapons from France and then calling it as our great achievement is not sufficient because a great power makes its weapons, its coercive capacity, or majority of it. Economic capability, numbers are good, but then whether it is so vulnerable to so many of these pressures, and there's a great potential for stagflation, which doesn't go very well. Technology is very important. I'm curious to know from what kind of technology India has put the efforts into it, not simply IT alone. And then the demographic dividend that we have been talking about. So India is definitely made progress into 2 decades. The US accommodation, very important. The East Asian states have started to look at it. As a quasi-great power, it is emerging, but raw indicators matter. Its peaceful integration is possible, even though it may take time because of systemic changes. But I will leave with a thought about the internal divisions that we are witnessing today, whether it is going to help India's great power status. Some may think it may, but my fear is that there are very few takers outside, very narrow groups around the world for an India that is divided or internally going a different route. I won't go too much into it since I don't want to interfere in political areas at this point. But this book is, I hope to tell and give some ideas to some of our elite thinkers in particular that it is not that simple to get the position you deserve. You need to make certain changes, and sometimes that doesn't happen because of domestic politics or individual belief systems, which may be not always contemporary in many sense.